I had talked about this in a previous video that I had done that I had titled Communism Out of Necessity. Because it's not that people wake up one morning and, you know, vote who wants communism and the people say I, right? That's not how it works. The reason why socialism leads to communism is because of the simple principle that the Apostle Paul had stated when he had said, "He who does not work does not eat." And so, in the beginning, when everybody is participating in the workforce, like how things were 100 years ago, it's easier to say to this small group of people, how about we provide, you know, a way of life so that these people who can't work, they're disabled, they're elderly, they're sick, can we all vote to do something for those people so that they don't have to go out and work because they can't work? Well, the alternative is we let them die. And so naturally, people will think upon that subject and say, okay, that sounds reasonable. Would you be willing to chip in? And this is why back in the days, most churches were responsible for this, right? They would take a collection for sister so and so or brother so and so who was sick. And then with communism, and this is why the communists often look at that scripture, um, each according to their ability and each according to their need. And Karl Marx and many who believe in socialism point to the Bible and say, well, look, you see, the Christians lived in there and advocate for socialism and communism. So in essence, we have the backing by God. And Karl Marx actually said this. Karl Marx actually stated that God was behind his concept. And of course, I guess he forgot the scripture where Paul later on went on to say, he who does not work does not eat. And so many people adopted Karl Marx's way of thinking an economy could run. And so many people look at what is going on where they hear the conspiracy theories of you're going to eat the bugs and you will own nothing and you will be happy. And it's because of socialism why you will own nothing. It's because of socialism why you will eat the bugs. And this is what happened in Cuba. It's what happened in Venezuela, right? They resorted to eating the animals in the zoo at one point. And then when that ran out, the women fled into places like Colombia. And this is why I had said in many of my videos that most American women will become prostitutes. Because when you go to Colombia, and I've been to Colombia many times, most of the women that you see that are on the streets, like say for example, let's say you go to Cartagena. Cartagena is like the equivalent of the Miami of Colombia. So if you want to go, they have like the city square, which is like the clock tower area. They've got beautiful beaches and they have a lot of scenery that looks very similar to Miami. They see all these big, huge white buildings and they're like, oh, they're copying Miami. And I'm like, no, it's because it's fucking sunny, you moron. Anyway, so when you go to these centers where this is typically where like all the bars are and all the restaurants and the rooftop lounges, etc. In the center, there's this huge clock tower. There's a huge tower with a clock on it. And that's where you'll see a lot of the prostitutes at night. And so you'll see there's a hotel that's like right above like this bar area. And I remember when I was there a couple of months ago and I see like this huge line of like men from Europe, from different backgrounds, all walking in with these young women. And I know exactly what's going on. And so I was there with one of my girlfriends that I typically hang out with when I go to Colombia. She lives in Bogota. And so I called her up, let her know, hey, I'm going to be here. And I flew her out so she can come spend time with me. And I was looking and she was like, yeah, look, they're all the prostitutes. And it's because that's what happened to all the women in Colombia. All the women who were strong and independent, all these college degreed women in Venezuela. And remember, Venezuela was the most richest country out of all Hispanic countries. It was the fifth leading economy in the world. And when it collapsed, the women became prostitutes. All the women that had all these degrees meant absolutely nothing. And they were busy giving blowjobs and offering sex for men in places like in Colombia just to survive. And of course, they're working to the best that they can. And so what you end up with, because of socialism, is you end up with economic collapse. And so the people who are higher up, who are going to maintain their power, they understand what's coming, and they have to sell it to you in a way that is acceptable, the way that people will accept it. And so they talk about this stuff, right? Tyson Food joins bug protein craze in partnership with startup. Now, why is Tyson, that typically produces chicken, going to be serving you bugs on a plate? And it's because Tyson Foods is closing 4 chicken processing plants in cost-cutting move. And so if you remember, this is typically what the government does, where the government will, talk about, we need to tax these greedy corporations. And so they impose taxes on the corporations, and corporations don't pay taxes by nature. People pay taxes. And so when the government says, well, we're going to rob your business and we're going to socialize that to the people, right? Because this is what they say to you, right? We're going to we're going to make them pay their fair share. All they're going to do is just pass on the increasing price as a result to you, whoever you is that is a producer. You see, what you end up with in socialism is you end up with a lot of people who don't want to work, because they realize at the end of the day, I can get welfare from the state. And this is why so many people move to California and become homeless. This is why California has such a big homeless problem, because this is why they tell you, right, don't feed the stray cats, because you'll get more of them, right? This is why they say don't feed the pigeons in the park. Why? Because you will get more of them. And so this is what you get. And so when the people who wear their heart on their sleeve say, we need to do something for these people, the people in government rub their hands, because they know there's money to be made. And of course, they find a friend of theirs and, hey, start up this business. We're going to pass this bill. And of course, their friends who own this business of the we're going to help the homeless business, and then they pass that money on to them. And so this is why you look at things like that California does, and they had all these tents outside of like these government buildings, and each of those little, I think it was like a 8x6 or an 8x8. It was really small. It was like small little, maybe 6 or 8 foot square space in the parking lot, right? And they're like, oh, we're gonna put tents there, and those tents cost $80,000. This is what you end up with in socialism, because people, they realize that they're going to pull that money away. This is what I said, that the money rises to the top in socialism, because you don't own your labor. And so they can devalue your labor. When the people sit here and say, defund the police, or the people say, you need to do something, you need to lower my insulin costs, and the government sits there and they rub their hands and like, great, we're going to print some money, and they go, here you go. Here's that money to pay for your insulin. Here's that money to go to college. Here's that money to do this. And then the people who are producing are the ones that end up paying for it. And so what you end up with is people realizing that it's not worth working. And so you get some people who scam the system. And then you get some people that understand the system, and they just say, I'm going to work the least that I can, because they know that they don't own their labor. And so as time goes by, you end up with an economic collapse. Because as I had said in my previous video, eventually you run out of other people's money, because it becomes too expensive for the producers in an economy to have children, because they're too busy producing. This is why you see so many single women in the country, and why they have to gaslight the women who the men can no longer afford, that you're strong and independent. Also because they need those women to go to work. So they need to make that system of dating as toxic as possible, so that you don't take these women out of the workforce to go and be wives. They need those women here to work to pay for the welfare for the people who came before them. And so this is why you see there was that recent discussion that went on with like Starbucks. It was like a Starbucks employee, and then of course it's making the rounds now on YouTube. This is why they do it, because these women in essence have been sold into bondage to corporate slavery under the guise of you are strong and independent, you don't need a man. When the real fact is that the government needs these women to go out and pay for the welfare. And so they create the scenario where it's just too difficult for men to be willing to take these women as wives and to bear children with them. And this is what you end up with. And so this is why you see all these different scenarios taking place in the West. Like I said, I watch a lot of different YouTubers from the UK, and they talk about all these dystopian sort of laws and concepts that they're going to pass, where they're going to pass surveillance. You like in the UK, they have these cameras where if you're driving a gas inefficient, it's not an EV, well then you're going to have to pay a tax. If you want to eat meat, for example, then you're going to pay a carbon tax. If you want to fly to this certain destination, you're limited on where you can go, unless of course you can afford it, because the prices are going to be high. And this is what you end up with in socialism. This is what you get. And so what it turns into, as the resources start to dwindle, is it then becomes more and more and more authoritarian. Because the people who are in charge, the people who are in power, are not going to give up that power. They're not going to say, we're going to switch to a merit-based economy like in capitalism. They derive their power from the people who vote and say, we want more taxes. We want you to create more currency. They vote for socialism. And overwhelmingly, women vote for socialism because they're dependent. They're dependent on men, one way or another. And this is what you end up with. You will eat the bugs. You will own nothing. I'm not quite sure if you'll be happy, but that's what they tell you, that you'll be happy. So for people who are thinking that, oh, this is just a conspiracy theory, it's an economic problem, but they have to sell it to you in a way that's palatable. So what do they say? Oh, we need to save the planet. We need to do this for your health. We need to, the ozone nonsense, right? But these people will then go and build houses, right? Like people that live in like Martha's Vineyard, like the Obamas. Obama was a big proponent of climate change, and so was Al Gore. But then all of them went and bought homes on beachfront property. And I'm like, well, if the ocean level is going to rise, then what are you doing on the beach? And it's just to socialize and to pull that wealth away from you so that they can give it to themselves. And this is what you end up with. But when the resources start to dwindle and they're running out of other people's money, the only thing that remains is communism. The only thing that remains is a totalitarian state. And the velvet glove comes off, and the only thing left is an iron fist. And that is what awaits many people who live in America and in the Americas and in many parts of Europe, because the Europeans are going to suffer even more. Because America is the one who is in charge of those nations. And so they will pillage the European nations. It is what it is. It's what you have voted for. This is why you don't lose wars. Because when you lose wars, you become a slave to the person that you've lost. And this is what most of the European countries are. They're just slave states. They're vassal states to the United States. This is the reality of what is going on economically. And overwhelmingly, it's the people's fault, because the people keep advocating for socialism, because they refuse to go through the hard times. But you can only stem off the hard times for so long, until your children and your grandchildren are the ones that are going to go hungry. And this is what you end up with: poverty. And so this is why they tell you that you will eat the bugs, because it's too expensive. You can't afford anything else. This is why I had said before, this is the poverty that socialism leads to. It is what it is, and it's coming. And they're trying to do everything that they can to prepare you for it, so that the people don't starve. At least you have something that we can offer you. Just like back in the day, like remember the poverty of World War One, right? When they went through the Great Depression, all they could give the people is maybe some bread and the government cheese. Many people remember government cheese, and those days will come back because the people don't learn that socialism always leads to poverty. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.